So nice to see everybody here, either your faces, your names. Lovely that you were able to make it today. So who am I? I'm Jenna, I use she and her pronouns. I have been with CCASA since November of 2019, so mostly pandemic times, interesting pandemic times the last year or so. So I am the Sexual Assault Response Program Manager here at CCASA. I work with sexual assault response teams and basically collaborating to comprehensively address sexual violence. Before I was with CCASA, I've done quite a few things within the field of sexual violence. So I started working when I was in college on a rape crisis hotline. After that, I did counseling with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, both here and in Latin America. I've trained in the past law enforcement on best practice and investigation, sexual assault response teams, sexual assault nurse examiners, advocates, as well as district attorneys in best practice in addressing sexual violence. And before I came to Colorado, I was managing a sexual violence prevention program out of Portland, Oregon. So what I did there is I worked mostly with high schoolers to actually implement a primary prevention curricula on healthy relationships, really trying to balance the gunk and the good. The gunk being sexual violence exists in our society and there's the root causes to why, and then the good of healthy relationships can exist too. I also worked with teachers, doing a train the trainer for them to implement the curriculum, and school districts. So all of that work is going to help to inform this presentation today. When I'm not doing work around sexual violence, I'm backpacking in the mountains, I'm loving on my kitty cat, and I'm eating donuts because they taste great. All right, so here's what we've got lined up for us today. We're going to discuss teen dating violence. What is it? How often does it happen? Some of the dynamics of the violence, as well as some of the tips for advocacy, providing advocacy. We're going to talk about how to discuss healthy relationships with people, with teens who have experienced sexual violence. We're going to explore some of the elements of what makes up a healthy sexual and romantic relationship, and then examine relationships as a survivor, some of the things that can make it challenging. All right, so we wanted to host this specific presentation because February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So it is the time for us to really focus on this topic. And it does, it does disproportionately impact, sexual violence does disproportionately impact younger people. As well as other populations, specifically marginalized populations. So what is teen dating violence? Just like violence in all forms in general, teen dating violence can be physical, when somebody physically hurts someone else. It can be sexual, and the sexual part of it can also be physical, but it can be other ways like trafficking, like reproductive coercion, and as well as electronic. So trafficking can be somebody who's forced into doing sexual acts in return for some sort of, it could either be money or something else. And basically, if you're a minor and you're doing something that other people may consider prostitution or sex work, then that would be considered trafficking. Reproductive coercion is also a part of teen dating violence, where somebody tries to control someone's ability to utilize birth control in whatever form that they might do that in. So that could be not allowing someone to use birth control pills. It could be poking holes into condoms, and like stealthing, if you've heard of stealthing, where you say that you're putting on a condom, but then you take it off at some point. So those can be elements of teen dating violence relationships. It can be psychological, putting someone down, insulting them, gaslighting them, making them feel like their concerns are crazy. And it can also be electronic, especially where we're at in our society now and where we're at with the pandemic. Younger folks, as well as older folks, and everyone in between is becoming more and more reliant on technology. And the way that we connect with each other is more and more virtual or electronic. And many of us are addicted to our phones. And so the way that people connect over social media, over text, over FaceTime, violence can then be seen through there, through not allowing people to be friends with other people, through checking on someone's phone, through non-consensual distribution of nude images or conversations that can be shared. So this is just a brief overview over what teen dating violence can be. Obviously, this is not comprehensive. There's a lot more to it, but we're going to spend more time today focusing on the aspect of healthy sexuality and relationships. So how often does teen dating violence happen? Well, the answer is too often. But the infographic that we have here from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which was just 2020, nearly 1 in 11 female teenagers experience it, and about 1 in 15 male teenagers experience physical dating violence in the last year. And about 1 in 9 females and 1 in 36 males experience sexual dating violence. So these numbers are pretty huge. And then 26% of women and 15% of men experience intimate partner violence. That means violence within a relationship, whether that's a hookup relationship, a committed relationship of some sort, before the age of 18. So when you combine the different forms of dating violence, whether that's sexual, whether that's physical, whether that's emotional, the number goes up even higher. Here's another way to look at it, another CDC infographic. When you talk to adults, you see that a good percentage of them experienced rape, at least the first rape that they experienced, as a minor. So I'm going to ask you to participate in this because you all are experts in this field as well. And I'm just one person here who's in the presentation seat. But you all have been doing this too. And so we all have a lot of collective knowledge. So I'm going to talk about just a few of the impacts. But again, this is not going to be comprehensive. So I really encourage you to use the chat box and think about when you have seen or worked with teens who are experiencing or have experienced teen dating violence, what are some of the impacts that it's had on their lives? And it's never just the individual who's impacted by teen dating violence or any type of violence. There's always secondary victims or secondary survivors who could be friends, family, and the larger community. And communities can look different. It can look like a school community, it can look like a church community, it can be a cultural community. So some of the ones that I listed here are depression, the inability to anhedonia, so the inability to find pleasure in activities that you once found pleasure in, the inability to kind of get up and do the activities that you normally would do. Feeling anxiety, and it can be a general anxiety, it could be a level of hypervigilance, kind of on guard oftentimes, which is oftentimes rooted in the neurobiology of trauma. Isolation. So one of the tactics that people who cause harm in relationships use is isolating that person from their friends, their families, the activities that they would engage with. And then even if they were to separate from that person, that isolation can be challenging for them to reintegrate things into their life. Skipping school, not paying attention in class, falling asleep in class. Suicidality. We've all heard stories of people who have experienced, for example, a nude image of them being shared in school. And the impact of that can mean that people commit suicide. So attempts at suicide, suicidality, completed suicides. In the box, I'm seeing people write down substance abuse, eating disorders, absolutely. So substance abuse for coping, eating disorders, trying to control your body, trying to control something. Running behaviors, series of unhealthy relationships, withdrawal from relationships, disassociation, self-harm, yes, all of these things. And especially when we're looking at youth who are in still developmental stages, any change in behavior is an indication that there could be violence in their life. So we're going to briefly look at some of the dynamics that can be involved in teen dating violence relationships. A lot of these are going to be true for anybody who's experienced violence, sexual violence, dating violence, but these can be especially true for teens. not defining your experience in teen dating violence as violence. So much of the media that we've consumed, whether that's a book, whether that's a movie or a TV show or pornography, it normalizes a lot of teen violence, hanging from a Ferris wheel to say, go out with me. I love you so much that I'll hurt myself if you don't go out with me, or I'll never let you go type themes. That's actually violence, but it's been normalized and romanticized. So it makes it hard sometimes for people to understand what violence can be for them. Seeking support can also be a challenge. And I think one of the most challenging parts of this is that the vast majority of adults in a teenager's life are going to be a mandated reporter. So I would just wager a guess that the vast majority of you, if not all of you on this webinar right now, are mandated reporters. One of the biggest concerns that teen survivors have is that they don't want other people to find out. And so if they go to try and get support from someone confidentially, it can be very challenging. And we're going to talk about mandated reporting in a few slides more. Just like anybody, teens have a fear of being not believed. But what I think is especially what is unique to being a teen is that they are less likely to be believed. They're given less credibility and power because of their age. There's also oftentimes a fear of authority figures or a distrust of authority figures, whoever that authority figure might be, a teacher, a social worker, a dean, even a counselor at a school. And feel free to put some more dynamics in there. Name what you see in your experience. All right, so some other things that we see that are specific to folks who are teens is the fear of their reputation being ruined. When you're going to high school, I think your reputation can mean a lot to you. And one of the threats that sometimes people who cause harm within relationships do is they use that as leverage. They use it as a threat that I'm going to tell everybody this about you, I'm going to smear you, or that smearing can be part of an abusive relationship. Also, I'm going to talk a little about virginity, which goes along with the relationship. Our society puts a lot on purity and virginity. And if you're I don't know if anyone has read the book, The Purity Myth by Jessica Valenti, but it's a good, even if you just Google it, there's a documentary now and you could watch the trailer, watch the actual documentary, but the harm that the idea of virginity and purity, and if you don't have that, the harm that can do to your self-worth and to your reputation is quite harmful in our society. And I think that this is highlighted for people who are in their teen years. Teens are oftentimes going to school with the person who hurt them or is hurting them. That presents challenges. Even if there's been a report, there's not always a promise that they're going to be able to avoid each other or that they will be able to avoid the person who hurt them. Another important thing to name is that there are certain activities that teens can't do legally, like drink, or smoke cigarettes, or smoke marijuana, or use other drugs that are illegal for everyone or other illegal activity. And so they can be afraid to seek support because they can be afraid that they're going to get in trouble, either by the school or by law enforcement because of perhaps engaging in, let's say, underage drinking. So one of the things that we can do is let them know that in our positions, if it's true for your position, for example, if you're a community-based advocate, that's not something that you have to report. You don't have to talk necessarily about the underage drinking part of it. So talking to other folks in your community, like the school or law enforcement, can also be something that could be helpful. So speaking hypothetically to law enforcement in your community, working with your sexual assault response team, hypothetically, if teenagers come to us and they've experienced sexual violence, intimate partner sexual violence, and they were drinking or they were using drugs, how would you treat that? Would you charge them? And knowing the answer, and if that's going to be different, if you have different officers, like looking into that ahead of time can buffer some of these concerns so that you can better support the teen that you're working with. It's also, I think, important to not just do this with law enforcement, but know if what your school will do if they have a policy. There's universities and colleges who have what we call amnesty policies around this that can be helpful. So a few advocacy tips, and this is for advocates, but it can also be for anyone who's working with survivors who are teens. So I have biases, and so do you. We all do. We're growing up in a society, and we are living in a society, we're swimming in a society that's full of gunk, that's full of oppression, and stuff that we've been taught that isn't necessarily healthy. And because of the way our brain works, these biases will come up. And so I think it's important to be aware of some biases that you might have around working with teens, you might not. But one of the ways, because we can feel protective of people who are younger, we can, even though our intention is not to do so, to act in a paternalistic way that can be quite protective and doesn't necessarily provide them with a feeling of autonomy. And because we are mandated reporters to anybody who's 18 or younger, it can feel that way regardless, that they just don't have as much power as somebody who is an adult or not a mandated report. So being aware of the ways that we act that might be different with a teen in terms of paternalism and wanting to be a protector. Rights of minors for medical care. So one of the things that you can do is really read up on the rights that minors have, because although it is a mandated report, they do have certain things that they can do without parental permission. So for example, a medical forensic exam, testing for infections like HIV, pregnancy, abortion, counseling, and mental health services. So if you are thinking, oh gosh, I'm not sure exactly what this all looks like, CASA has a teen dating a teen toolkit, and it's great. It is so comprehensive. Near the very end of it, you can actually get all the CRSs, all the Colorado laws around minors and what their rights are, what they could do with and without permission of their parents. One other thing to consider, if you have a teen who's a minor who is needing to get medical services, and they're on their parents' insurance, one thing to be aware of is that medical treatment for an assault will show up under their parents' insurance. It's going to be a mandated report anyway, so their parents will likely find out. Medical providers need to report not to parents, but to law enforcement or child protective services. All right, I wanted to pause and see, Maria, do we have any questions yet or anything that we should address from the chat box?
Jenna, no, we don't have anything other than what you've already read.
All right, sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about mandated reporting. We could be doing a training just on mandated reporting, but we're just going to touch upon it. Because minors have less power because of their identity, they are a marginalized group and they experience sexual violence at even disproportionate rates, higher rates. It's really important that we do mandated reporting in the most trauma-informed way that we can. So that means we want to give them all the information ahead of time that we can. Let teens know that we are mandated reporters and what that means. So for example, when I was doing violence prevention classes in high schools, I would say, who here in your school is who is a mandated reporter. And that was like basically everybody except for me, because I was working in Oregon and privilege advocates actually are not mandated reporters there. So I was able to actually speak with survivors in my classroom without making a mandated report, unless they wanted me to make a report. But what I talk to them about is, if you are to tell anybody in your school who's an adult who's not me, I want to let you know what might happen. And it can be different. Every single case that you report can be different. But what happens is a phone call will be made to Child Protective Services and let them know that every single case can be different. Likely your parents will find out. They might choose to talk to different people in your life about it. They might choose to talk to you. So the other thing that I say to them then is, if you don't want this to happen yet, or if you're unsure you want a mandated report to happen, here's something that you can do. You can ask an adult hypothetical questions. Like, if somebody I knew in my life was experiencing this, what are the different options out there in terms of reporting, in terms of accommodation policies at school, in terms of support. Someone like that adult still might choose to make a mandated report. And that's an important thing to talk about within your agency. What is that like? If you are working on a support line, one of the things that you can do is you can say, hey, I just want to let you know, my name is Jenna. I'm an advocate and I'm confidential, but if you are under the age of 18 or over the age of 70, then I am a mandated reporter. If you don't want to give me any of your information about your name, where you live, your phone number, what school you go to, then I have nothing that I can report. So that person can still get support from you, but you are not then trying to do an investigation and get their information in a way that can feel like you are manipulating them to get the information, like you're actually trying to provide support and you're giving them the information upfront. When you do have to make a mandated report, you can still let survivors know that they have rights, teen survivors. So survivors when there's a mandated report and they don't want to engage with, whether that's a school, whether that's police, whoever it might be, you can let them know they don't have to talk to anybody. No one can force them to talk about what's going on if that's not something that they are ready for or that they want. No one can force them to engage in a medical forensics exam if they do not want to. And ideally, your agency is not working with a survivor if they're being forced to go to advocacy or go to therapy. If they are being forced, hopefully your agency is not going to take cases like that. If they are, and the survivor doesn't actually want to be there, but they're kind of being forced to be there, one of the ways that you can handle that is say to them, this is a time then for you to use however you want. If you want to talk about the TV shows that you like, we can do that. If you want to sit here and play on your phone with me, that's up to you as well. I think the key here is recognizing that minors or teenagers who get a mandated report, who have a mandated report, they don't have power. And the experience of violence in their life means that power was taken away from them. And what we want to do in our roles is try and give as much power back to them as we can and control that they can feel that they can have in their life within the context of our restrictions. Okay. So I'm gonna start transitioning a little bit over about why we want to talk to teens who experience violence about healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. Being the survivor of sexual violence is the highest predictor of future victimization, higher than other identities that they might hold. It's a very high predictor. So it's very important that we talk to teens about what a healthy relationship actually looks like. Many of us in our lives haven't had the opportunity to have that modeled for us from the adults that are around us, nor have we had that opportunity from the media that we consume, nor have we had that from health class. So it's really important that we try and do that when we can. So let's dive in. Let's start talking about healthy relationships and sexuality for teen survivors of sexual violence. Okay, so here's where I'm gonna ask you to participate. What are some of the concerns or questions that you have gotten from teen survivors of dating violence or sexual violence about their new relationships or about future relationships, future sexuality concerns? So I listed some of them on this screen, but I'm hearing what are the concerns that you hear from survivors? And if you've seen some of these on the screen, if you want to use annotate, which we didn't talk to you about, but you can go to more ... and then hit annotate and then go to the stamp feature, which I'm going to just show you right now. And then you could stamp, right? So you see me stamping on the screen right now. You also have the option of doing that. So I'm reading in the chat, will I ever have a normal relationship? Absolutely. My parents will blame me. Common fear. I'm seeing people say, how do I talk about it with a new partner? How to avoid getting triggered. Will anyone want me anymore? I'm afraid being a victim defines me. So I'm seeing people agree that they've also heard some of the questions, comments, concerns that, that I put up here. This is how my parents are. This is just how relationships are. Yes, absolutely. If you have not seen any other examples than unhealthy relationships, then that's your understanding of what a relationship is. And that's why we have such a great opportunity to interrupt that and let them know, actually, what you've experienced is violence and you deserve to have something that's healthy. Let's talk about what healthy is. So many people don't think that it's mushy or it's awkward or it's weird to have communication in your romantic and sexual relationships because we don't ever have it modeled for us. So I totally get why people think it's awkward and weird, and it's so important for us to start talking about it. We can't skip over it because it feels awkward or weird. Going back to the chat, how do I move through and not let victimization guide my relationships? Will I be able to trust myself or a new partner? Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for putting those in there. I'm going to go ahead and clear all the drawings and then we'll move on. Okay. So using your existing skills is going to be important here, even when just talking through those questions and talking through healthy relationships. So validate that, I understand why you're concerned about that. Like, I hear that. I understand why you're saying that. Normalize it. I've heard this from a lot of people who have experienced sexual assault. Like, you're normal for having that concern. It's not like a weird thing. So normalize it and then empathize. It really stinks that that someone who chose to hurt you now that's continuing to other relationships. Really empathize about how this is impacting future relationships. And then focus on self-empowerment. So it does stink and it feels like you can be out of control. Like, how do I even trust myself? I don't feel like I have control. How do I trust that I'll ever have a relationship? How do I trust I can feel safe? So focus on the fact that you do have control, that you have control who you spend time with. You have control over the boundaries that you draw. And this is a process, right? That this is not just like, hey, guess what? You have control. Great. Now go ahead and have control in your life. We all know that's not how it works, but reminding them that it's going to be a process and they can work towards setting boundaries, exploring what they want and what they don't want. And that's an empowering thing that they could take back. Help them to process options. Are you ready to start a new relationship? Are you ready to be sexual? Don't guide them, don't tell them what to do, don't impose your own ideas on them, but help them to think through the pros and cons of what is right for them at this time based on their desires, their needs, their values, and then support them through that process with resources and being there for them. Getting them as much information is so important. Letting them know what their options are, of course, within support and response after experiencing violence, but also the options for different types of relationships. I think that we are taught that there's one type of relationship, there's one type of living in this life, but there are so many ways that we can have relationships. Romantic relationships that don't have to have sexuality. Intimacy can look so many different ways. Comprehensive sex education is sexual violence prevention. I'm pausing because that's really important for our communities to know. Comprehensive sex education is sexual violence prevention. People need to know how their body works and not just about how babies are made. So why do most people have sex? The vast majority of the time that they have sex. Is it to have babies? No, there would be so many babies in this world. That would be terrifying that every time someone had sex, they would have a baby. No, and that's very heterocentric. So that means we're focusing on just people who have a penis and a vagina and the ability to make babies through that. So when we talk about sex and sexuality, it's much more than reproduction. And I think it's really important that we admit that. I think that that's really hard and awkward because we are not a society that talks about pleasure with sex, especially with teenagers. So I think it's important for us to kind of get comfortable admitting that and talking about it, because if we're uncomfortable, teens are going to be able to sense that. And they're also going to test the boundaries of how comfortable you are around that. Talking about contraception, if somebody is going to be hooking up with somebody who could get them pregnant or they could get pregnant. And also talking about, of course, protection in terms of condom usage or barriers of some variety. And of course, there's sexual rights. You have the right to feel safe. You have the right to feel comfortable. You have the right to have your no listened to. You have the right to feel safe and comfortable in all relationships. So Ashley asked, do you have a comprehensive sex education curriculum that you like? Ashley, that is a great question. Margaret, you said COSHI is a great resource for grant-funded curricula. So I think that there's a lot of great guidance documents out there on comprehensive sex ed. The Trailhead Institute, which I'm going to just go ahead and put into the chat, is one here in Colorado. It's a nonprofit organization. They provide guidance to school districts around Colorado on how to implement comprehensive sex ed. And a part of comprehensive sex ed is doing consent education, talking about boundaries, talking about what they consider refusal skills. I don't really like the way that that's phrased personally, refusal skills, but how to show yes and how to show no, how to look for yes, how to look for no, and how to navigate that. So who can talk and have influence with teens? Anyone can, but we can see that parents do have a lot of influence, as do friends. Advocates are not on this list, but I think you do as well, especially if you're somebody who's developed a relationship with a teen. So this slide is important to me to put on here because I got calls all the time when I worked for a direct service agency from parents who said my daughter, my son, my child was assaulted. I don't know what to do. Please help me with support. And most of the time what I would say to them is, validating that it's great that you came, it's great that you care. Here's how to avoid victim blaming. Here's how to try and empower them. Here's how to be patient. But I think it's also important to say, also, here's how to talk about healthy, unhealthy relationships with them and point them in the direction of resources for parents talking to their teens about healthy and unhealthy sexuality, because that is a very important conversation that needs to be had. And it should be happening in terms of prevention, but that's not always something that happens. And so doing it after their child or the person that they are supporting, whatever role that is, has experienced sexual assault is also really important. And at the end, I'm going to give you a lot of different resources that parents can use as well. Okay, let's talk about porn for a minute. So talking about access to information, most teens question what sex is like. What does it look like? What are the different ways people do it? It's a natural thought that comes to them. There's nothing wrong with thinking that. It's absolutely 100% natural. Most parents don't sit their child down and say, these are the different things. This is the sex menu of things you can do with your body. Here's how you make sure that your partner finds pleasure when you're having sex. Here's how you find pleasure in your body. That's not something most parents do. It'd be super awesome if they did. I'm sure there are some that do. There aren't that many books that parents buy to say, here, go read this about sex and pleasure. There's that about like how babies are made, but not about pleasure, which is, again, like the main reason that people have sex. So, or engage. And when I say sex, I mean, sex can mean lots of different things for different people. So I want to talk about porn for just a minute. I'm not here to bash porn. I'm not here to promote porn. But what I do want to say is that a lot of people are getting sex education from porn. Research shows this. And we live in a society where our media is influenced by some of these, by some of the negative things in our society, like misogyny, like violence against women, like racism. So if we see that in movies, if we see that in TV, we're going to see that in porn too. And we do, very much so, except it's sexualized. So if you're watching mainstream porn, oftentimes what you're seeing is sexualized violence. porn is meant to be a fantasy. It is about things that shouldn't be directly translated because it doesn't show, oftentimes mainstream porn at least, doesn't show consent. It doesn't show people using different forms of birth control or protection. What it does show is oftentimes sexualized violence. And that violence, people don't ask for consent before, for example, calling someone a name that's degrading, physically hurting somebody else, strangling them. What it often does show is that like the women like it and the men enjoy doing it to them. And the vast majority of times in porn, and research supports this, what we do see is that men, cisgender men are the ones who are being violent towards women in the porn. And it shows the women enjoying it. So if you are a 10-year-old boy and you're like, what does sex look like? No one's ever told me about this, but people talk about sex a lot. It's like a thing. It's a huge thing. And they look to porn for an example of what sex is. What's porn teaching them? The average age of exposure for boys is around 8 to 12. It's a little bit later for girls. It's not always purposeful that they go searching for it. It can be accidental that they're Googling something on Google Images and something else pops up. It can be that someone else around them was watching it. And it can be also a part of violence where adults are asking the young kids to watch porn. What research does show is that watching mainstream pornography, which does contain problematic elements where there isn't consent asked, where there is sexualized violence, it is linked to victim blaming and minimizing the harm of sexual violence when they look at people's attitudes in research. They also show that it's linked to teen dating violence. So I'm not here to say, let's eliminate porn, porn is evil. I'm here to say that we need to talk to people about porn. We need to talk to people and say, hey, there are really critical elements that are missing. And here's the elements. Here's what you need to have in a healthy sexual relationship. There is porn out there that is very intentional about consent, that is intentional about having diversity in bodies. Oftentimes that's called feminist porn. Okay, so let's move into how to talk to teen survivors about healthy sexuality. We're going to talk in general about what a healthy relationship is, and I'm going to kind of model for you how I've done that. And then we're going to talk specifically about being a survivor and healthy sexuality. So what are elements of a healthy relationship? I don't know if any of you, I'm going to put this in the chat, have heard of CERTs. But I used to use that in the curriculum that I created when I was doing prevention. Consent, equity, respect, trust, and safety is what it stood for. So we're going to take a look at some of those elements. Right. So let's take a look at consent first. So it is essential that we're talking about consent all the time. And like from the time a baby is born, from like the time that like you have consciousness, being able to have some bodily autonomy and having that taught to us is so important. No, you don't have to go hug your aunt. No, you don't have to go hug your uncle if you don't want to. You get to control your body. And I know that depending on what culture you come from, although I've seen that in many cultures, in mainstream society, that's a challenge. And because of that, people really, really need to be taught that consent in hugging, in touching, in any sexual behavior is baseline important. So I really like Planned Parenthood's way of talking about it using fries, because French fries are amazing and I love them. But also it gives us a really awesome infographic. So consent is freely given. So what that means is there's not pressure. A lot of people don't understand if there's not physical force involved, that it can still be sexual assault, right? So like if somebody's pressuring someone to do something and they don't want to do it sexually, and they say, no, I don't want to do this. No, I don't want to do this. And someone pressures them until they finally give in. That's not consent. It's also not consent if you are drunk or high. And really process that with them, because one thing that I've heard a lot is that like, you can't give consent if you're drunk. That's true. It's true legally, it's true in what we say, and there's nuance to it. So if you got like two 40-year-old adults who are in a consenting relationship and they go out and they each have a glass of wine, does that mean that they can't have consensual sex? No, we need to treat teens like they can understand this nuance, right? We need teens to understand that even if you have a drink, you can still sometimes give consent, and like it depends on your body weight, it depends on your tolerance level, it depends on a lot of things, but it does muddy the waters a lot. It's complicated, it's not black and white, and I know that we want black and white like answers, especially when talking to teens about this, but that's just not the world we live in. Consent is also something reversible. And this is also another reason why a lot of people don't define their experience as sexual assault, because they maybe said yes to kissing, or maybe they said, yeah, let's go and let's have sex. And then like, actually, I don't want to do this. No, thank you. No, stop. Let's not do this. They said it or they showed it in some way and that wasn't respected. And they said, well, oh, because they said yes to this, it must have, they thought like, you know, it's fine then, but it's not fine. You always have the right to say no at any time. And there's this idea of blue balls. Blue balls is not real. Can it maybe be uncomfortable if somebody is aroused and then they don't actually orgasm? Yeah, that might be uncomfortable. It's not dangerous. It's not going to hurt someone. And people can masturbate if they really need to. But that blue balls is oftentimes used manipulatively, and that's not okay. And so we need to talk about blue balls. Consent should be informed. You should understand how your body works, how your partner's body works, what type of commitment or non-commitment you're having, if your partner's having sex with other people, all of that. Enthusiastic. Okay, so people are like, oh, you mean I have to be jumping up and down for someone to make out with me? I'm like, no, it doesn't mean they have to be jumping up and down. What it means is that if someone is ever not, if you're ever not 100% sure that someone's into it, if they're not touching you back, if they're not fully engaging in a way, then you should be monitoring that. And then you should check in with them. Hey, are you feeling this? Do you want to keep going? That's what people deserve in healthy sexuality. It's also specific. So every single thing that you do, you need to make sure that the person's into. It doesn't mean that you have to like a lot of teens will be like, oh, you mean I have to say like, can I now move my hand up 1 inch? Can I now put my mouth in this place? Can I now do this? And they're like, that's so unsexy, that's weird, that's robotic. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying that. Let's be realistic when we talk with teens about what this means. I think using verbal consent is really cool. I think it can eliminate some of the fuzziness. And I think we need to be realistic that non-body or non-verbal, I use a lot of it too. The way that we look at each other nonverbal is the way that we communicate most often, with our facial expressions, with our bodies, with touching. So looking to make sure that everything that you're doing, your partner's into, and check in if you're gonna maybe like be taking off pieces of clothing. Maybe that's like a good part to like check in on, or touching places you haven't touched before. All right, I'm gonna go over to the chat box. The legality of consent is really challenging and problematic. Sex assault and rape are really hard to prosecute, especially with reversible. Yeah, I hear you. How do we have a conversation with teens knowing that most cases are not actually prosecuted? Okay, so this is the reality. Don't lie to them about that reality. I actually talked to them about this. When I was working with teens, I would talk to them about how it's your right and your responsibility. It's your right to have people treat you in a healthy way. It's your responsibility to treat other people in a healthy way. We talk like empathy building is one of the protective factors. There's risk and protective factors when it comes to perpetrating sexual violence. Building empathy for the impact that you could have if you sexually harm someone is one of those. So I think that's a really important part when you're talking to teens about healthy sexuality, really building up that protective factor of empathy. So talking to survivors of teen violence about consent is important because they need to understand what sexual violence is. But also, so much of self-blame has to do with, well, I shouldn't have kissed them in the first place, right? Going back to reversible. But I eventually gave in and just let them do it. The freely given. So it validates their experience and it can mitigate self-blame if you explain to them about consent. It can help them to understand their rights, especially if all they've ever had as an example is unhealthy stuff. And then consent is always drawing a boundary. We should talk about boundaries all the time. And so we're gonna go into boundaries for a minute, like more, we're definitely gonna do more than a minute. We're gonna do quite a few minutes. So boundaries are something that I think people don't think about, but it's something that governs our life all the time. So when I did sexual violence prevention work in schools, I was originally in health class, and I said, we need to be getting to them earlier. I mean, we need sexual violence prevention from all ages, right? But I started working then with the freshmen. where we started is what are boundaries? And then we went to what is consent. Because people don't necessarily think of boundaries where we have it every single day. How far do we walk apart from each other? Do we hug people? Do we handshake with each other? And there are different types of boundaries we have within relationships. They can be emotional boundaries, how much commitment, how much intimacy, how much closeness do you want to have with somebody? They can be physical boundaries of how much touch do you want? It can be how much sexuality do you want in your relationship, like how much activity in terms, how often, what kind, and then digital in terms of sharing different things on social media, for example. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you some online resources that I really like. And can you just confirm, somebody either verbally or in the chat, that you can see the screen that says how to set boundaries from loveisrespect.org?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I love these sites. I think they're amazing. They're colorful, they're fun, they're mostly accessible. But here you go. So let's say you're working with a teen and you're helping them to explore boundaries. What are my boundaries? This helps them to do so. And here they break it down too. So digital boundaries, let's go to that. It'll help to actually look at certain things like, is it okay to follow or friend other people in my life for my partner? Is it okay to use each other's devices? If so, when? Is it okay to post about our relationship publicly? So you can utilize this website to work with the survivor. You could have them do it on your own. You could do it together to look at different boundaries. Also Scarleteen. I don't know if anyone loves Scarleteen. I love Scarleteen so hard. I think it's amazing. I was actually reading through a whole bunch of, hi, I'm 16 and I was sexually assaulted. And now I don't, now this about relationships, just to prepare for this. There's so many like that. Maria, thank you for putting these in the chat. So this is an amazing, very comprehensive list. A lot of times people are like, boundaries, well, I don't even know what to think about ahead of time. You're like, totally get you. Here's a list that we can go through together. You could go through on your own, but body boundaries, like thinking about touching your partner affectionately without asking for it. Is that okay with you? And this can be different depending on where this person is in their healing or in their life. Direct eye contact, that can be cultural, it can be also depending on like where you're at in your life. Talking about your partner's body. Also in terms of like your gender identity and the words that you like in terms of handsome, pretty, beautiful, cute, sexy, hot. All of those words can be really laden. So talking about that, and like words and terms, like terms that you like for your genitals to be referred to as, relationship models and choices, sex and safety, putting condoms on, lubrication, sexual responses, physical activities, getting hickeys. This is just like, it's a very comprehensive list of sexuality. And some of it might be a little like intense for somebody who's just thinking about getting back into being sexual or getting into being sexual after an assault. And that might mean you want to go through there and pick and choose some of the ones that maybe are earlier on so they don't feel overwhelmed or triggered. But these two, I think, are really great resources. And also just like Scarleteen, as well as Love is Respect, love those two sites. All right, so boundaries. Okay, so one of the activities that I used to do in the schools, I asked for volunteer. I let them know what activity I was doing first. Here's what to expect. I stood on one end of the classroom and they stood on the other. And I said, okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to walk towards me and stop whenever you're like, okay, this is my personal like bubble. I don't want you to come any closer. And I said, and if you get in my bubble, then I'm going to just ask you to stop, or I might take a step back. And I'm like, okay, now keep coming. And they come, and oftentimes I'm like, okay, hi, how does this feel to you? Are you comfortable? And then I take a step back and I'm like, is that any more comfortable? And I would say about 70% of the time, people came closer than they actually felt comfortable with. And they ended up taking a step back, or I took a step back, and we had a conversation, because oftentimes like there's barriers to us drawing our boundaries because we feel obligated. Like we should hug somebody, even if we're not in the mood or if we don't feel comfortable. We're afraid of what will happen if we don't do what that person wants us to do. Will they want to be friends with us? Will they break up with us? Will they give us a silent treatment? You don't want to hurt someone's feelings because you like them. And then of course there's freezing. So We know that freezing, or what some people refer to as tonic immobility, is a natural thing that your brain does, fight, flight, or freeze, when you experience a trauma. People who've experienced childhood sexual abuse or intimate partner violence, freezing is a very normal response for them, especially, for example, if you were a child and you were sexually abused, your coping mechanism is that you stay because that person has groomed you and used manipulation against you, and you don't run away, you don't fight. And so what happens is in your brain is that you build these roadways or these neural pathways. And what happens is that's a really deep, like, so I'm pointing my bike, you can't see it. like my neural pathway for riding a bike is really deep because I've done a lot of it. When you experience a trauma and a neural pathway is built, it's built as deep as something that you've done repetitively. So if you have experienced freezing in the past because of a trauma and you experience another similar trauma, the chances are your brain is going to go back to the way that it coped before. Explain that to survivors. It's really powerful information for them to have. It doesn't mean they're stuck there. We have neuroplasticity. Our brains are constantly growing. We're constantly able to learn. You can unlearn that. There's other coping and other strategies that you can have so that you don't always freeze. So drawing boundaries, it's important to think about, what are my boundaries in advance? It's not, like I said before, we don't always know, like, okay, well, what are the different things I may be confronted with, which is why that list is great. Some of the things that you might want to consider in terms of thinking about your boundaries for survivors, for all of us, are what do I feel comfortable with? What do I feel uncomfortable with? What makes me scared? What makes me feel safe? What are the morals that drive me? What do I want? What don't I want? And so your role can be to help someone explore that. Drawing our boundaries can be something that's done verbally, like, hey, I'm not really feeling like a hug today. Or like practicing asking, can I give you a hug? Obviously, we're living in a pandemic, so we're not really hugging. Would you feel comfortable with an elbow bump? Right? And so I think that this pandemic might actually help us to think more about physical boundaries more. And those nonverbal ways that we do that, like hug or handshake. But thinking about those boundaries and looking at how we can do that is an important part of exploring. The other thing is about just getting to know yourself. So much of the healing journey of being a survivor and exploring sexuality, it's cool because you're getting to know yourself. Who am I? What is it that I want? Who can I become? And that's actually a really exciting thing that you get to go on that journey with survivors. Okay, in terms of digital safety and boundaries, really quickly, we're not going to get into this too in depth, but there are people who send each other nude images when they're teens consensually as part of a healthy relationship, or sexy conversations. There are people and they do it without consent, and it's absolutely violence and it's illegal. It is also just illegal if you're under the age of 18 and if you possess or distribute a nude image. So you're not necessarily going to straight away get if it's something healthy, if it's consensual, you're not going to necessarily get charged with a felony. I'm not going to get into this. It's complicated. We have a webinar. I think Margaret was here and she did a webinar for us. It's great. Go to YouTube, go to CICASA on YouTube. Maria just put it in there. Thanks, Maria. And you could watch it. You could learn all about the sexting laws here in Colorado. All right. Everyone needs to hear this, that it is your right to have your partners make sure that you feel safe, make sure that you feel comfortable, and that you're actually into all that you are doing sexually. I don't think that this is like a concept that everybody gets, especially growing up experiencing violence or having experienced violence. I think this is something that like you really have to integrate on a level. And once you have it cognitively, you still have to integrate that into your boundaries and being able to assert your boundaries. And I think this is especially true. Okay, I don't have the book on my shelf. I lent it out. There's a book that I really like called Girls and Sex by Peggy Orenstein. And I'm just gonna, Maria, if you wouldn't mind typing that in, Girls and Sex, Peggy Orenstein. One thing I don't recommend you doing, I've said this before, but, oh yay, thank you, Graham. There you go. It's a good book. I don't recommend the going to a bookstore like I did and saying, "Do you have girls and sex?" The person looked at me like, anyway. But it's really important to understand this, because what research shows is that girls don't necessarily grow up thinking that sex is for them. They grow up doing it in a performative way, and they define a successful sexual experience if they get their partner off. And really what we're talking here is more heterosexual experience. And because of this, what we also see is the orgasm gap, that within heterosexual relationships, we see that men or boys in those experience orgasm at a much higher rate than girls or women. And it's not because girls and women are harder, that it's harder for them to get off. It's because there's less focus put on their pleasure. Okay, so everyone has those rights, and everybody has the responsibility to make sure that their partners feel safe, comfortable, and are into what they're doing sexually. And I think it's really important that we talk about both of those things. Building trust. So like one of the things I was put in the chat earlier is that like teen survivors say like, how am I ever supposed to trust anyone again? Or even trust myself? And that's real. One of the primary causes of experiencing trauma, because remember, trauma is not something like, oh, I was in a car accident, so now I have traumatized, because you could have two people who are in the same car accident and one person experiences post-traumatic stress and one person doesn't. So it's not the actual event, it's the way that our bodies respond to that event. And oftentimes part of the event that causes us trauma is the feeling of betrayal, because we knew that person, because we trusted that person, or we trusted safety in this world. And so building trust after experiencing betrayal is not the easiest thing. And it's a journey. It's a process, likely without an end. If you're familiar with trauma-informed principles, then you're going to be familiar with these concepts of how to rebuild trust. It's something that we have to do when we're working with survivors. It's something that has to happen in all types of relationships. Consistency, showing up when you say you're going to show up, and being there consistently for that person. Within boundaries, right? So just because that person calls you all the time, it doesn't mean that you're going to pick up. But when you say, I will make sure that I pick up during this time, or we have a date set, and so I will do it during that time, right? That type of consistency. And that type of consistency within relationships, also with boundaries, is something that can help build trust. Also transparency, communication, talking about where you're at, what you need, what you're feeling. That type of transparency builds trust. And then reliability, showing up and being there for somebody. Equity and respect, also very important parts of a relationship. So what is equity? Many of us are familiar with equality, but equity is equality is all of us getting the same thing. But if all of us went to, let's say, a coffee shop, and like you're into coffee, I'm not, I actually can't drink coffee because I get acid reflux and it causes me pain and discomfort. And also like I had caffeine this morning and I was like, ooh. So coffee's not going to work for me. So if it was equality and everybody got coffee, I'd be like, oh, this drink is not going to work for me. I have to throw it away anyway. So like equity could mean that I get like tea and you get coffee, right? So, and it's about in a relationship, it's more than just coffee. It's more than what you order. It's about a balance of power. Power dynamics are going to come up in relationships no matter what. It's just part of life. It's part of our identities. It's part of who cares more. But recognizing that power and talking about it and being transparent about it. And does it feel like that person always calls the shots? Does that feel like that's a balance? Do you feel like you always hang out with their friends, but never your friends? Does it feel like they always choose what you do and you never get to choose what you want to do? So balance of power and having equity in that is an important part of a relationship. And I think what that comes down to is a feeling of fairness. Does something feel unfair? And talk about what that is. Also going back to the orgasm gap, equity and pleasure if a sexual relationship is there. Making sure that people get what they want out of their sexuality, again, with consent and boundaries. And that doesn't necessarily mean orgasm. Different people are looking for different things in terms of sexual activity. Equity and respect means listening to somebody and hearing them, not listening so that you can respond, really hearing what they're having to say, seeing them for who they are and accepting that, not trying to make them someone who they aren't. And going back to equity, treating them how they want to be treated, right? So I think there's this phrase that's very common. I want to be treated like I treat people the way that I want to be treated. And I mean, I think that's great, but there are some people who want to be treated differently than the way that you want to be treated. Again, going back to the coffee thing, the way you want to be treated is that your partner buys you coffee in the morning. That's great, but I don't want coffee. Oop, went too fast. Okay. So one of the big questions I think that we oftentimes get, do I tell like new partners that I'm a survivor, that this happened to me in my past? It's not an easy decision. It's not a straightforward decision. It's unique to each person and where they're at and what they want. And here's some things that you can help them to ask these questions to help them process through the decision. What do you need from your partner? And how can you communicate that? So if you're going to get triggered if you're going to choose to be sexual with that person or intimate, even emotionally intimate or cuddly, what do you need from them to feel safe? Can you get that safety without disclosing to them? If not, are you going to be going through your relationship and there's going to be things coming up and there's going to be like this cloud hanging? Think about what you do when you don't want them to know. So even if you do tell them, hey, I've had some things in my past happen to me, and so that means like there's some more safety things I want to put in place. You don't have to tell them anything specific. So think about how much you want them to know versus how much you don't want them to know. And just like I was saying before, I would get lots of calls from parents, but I also get lots of calls from partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, loves, whatever someone calls their partner. How do I support my partner? Like this happened to them recently or 10 years ago or when they were a child. I've gotten that from teens I've worked with. I've gotten that a lot from teens I've worked with. Like, what do I do for my partner? My partner says like, I'm the only person they're safe with and it's kind of overwhelming and I'm trying to draw boundaries with them. And so if someone is a partner with somebody who's experienced sexual violence, they need support as well. So point them in the direction of where they could get that support, which there's the online resources. But then there's also advocacy agencies, and advocacy agencies, community-based advocacy agencies, it's also your role to be working with secondary survivors and providing education and support to everybody who's affected by sexual violence. One thing to keep in mind is that we always need to be cognizant of mandated reporting. So if that person comes to you, is it going to be a mandated report? Are they going to tell you who they're talking about? Does the person they're dating know that you're talking about this with someone else? So those are important considerations for that. Okay. How do I not get triggered? Like, how do I feel safe when I'm being sexual with somebody? Those are some of the questions that we saw that survivors asked before. So talking about that with them. Survivors experience triggers, right? That's when their brain brings them back to their sexual assault time, like the state that they were in during the sexual assault. And they experience some of those feelings again, and the feeling of unsafety. I think as you move farther away from your assault, oftentimes you'll learn more what your triggers are. And sometimes, oftentimes they have to do with the smell because of the location of the olfactory bulb being close to the parts of the brain that are capturing the memory. Oftentimes it can be like the sound of something or hearing words. So getting to know, again, yourself and getting to know your triggers is important. And there's always going to be things that could trigger you that you didn't know. So that's always something that can happen. Disassociation is something that oftentimes happens to survivors when they are triggered. So feelings like they're outside of their body. So if you're an advocate, if you're somebody who works in this field, then knowing how to help people come back into their body is important. So grounding techniques, if you Google grounding techniques, there's a plethora of them out there. There's lots of things. Basically what you're trying to do is get people to come back here in the moment. So like keeping, like a rock is something that I have here, and sometimes feeling that and feeling that texture on my hand can help. Or warming your hands up so you can feel the heat there, even just like digging your nails into your hand. So there's physical ways to try and help you come into your body, running water on your hands to feel that. There's also ways to try and bring yourself into your head in a cognitive way. So for example, trying to say the ABC backwards. If you've ever seen the TV show Jessica Jones, it's a Marvel comic TV show on Netflix. She survived intimate partner violence, although she didn't choose to have him as an intimate partner. So I guess I wouldn't consider it intimate partner violence. And one of the things that she would do is she would say the streets, like the streets in a row that she grew up on, like in the neighborhood that she grew up on. So having something that you could do to bring yourself back into your body that's familiar to you. I've heard people say that they use like a prayer and that helps them come back into their body. So something to help you from disassociating. And in a way, helping you to think about breathing activities, for example, or getting into your body. That is safety planning. So safety planning can look like different things. It can look like how to ground yourself. It can look like, okay, if I'm having a hard time drawing a boundary, because drawing boundaries can be hard for anyone, anybody. But I think it's especially hard for people who have a history of sexual abuse or sexual assault or teen dating violence or intimate partner violence. Really important to recognize that. So if you're having trouble drawing a boundary, what can you do? Make up an excuse like, oh, I forgot I have to go do this, or I think I heard a noise, or some sort of excuse like, oh, I'm feeling kind of sick, I need to go to the bathroom right now. So helping them to safety plan for them, things in the moment if they need to get out of the situation, or things that they can help in the moment to help ground them in the situation so they can try and feel safer if they are in a safe situation. It's also important to remind them that they should try their best to have patience with themselves. Healing is a journey. Finding sexuality in yourself that's comfortable and safe is a journey. And just helping to remind them that, and that there's not necessarily a need to rush is important, as well as like practicing kindness for yourself and not beating up on yourself for these things. One of the things that I like to do is when they say mean things about themselves, is, hey, would you tell a friend that? If you wouldn't tell that to a friend, why would you say it to yourself? Like trying to get them to let go of some of the self-harshities. One of the things that my friend Rachel says to me is, stop being so mean to my friend Jenna. And so that's one thing, depending on your relationship with someone, that you can say to them. Okay, so I don't know if anyone is familiar with the circles of sexuality, but I think it's really cool to talk to people who are struggling with relationships and sexuality after an assault. The sexuality is so, or basically anyone, everybody needs this information, but like sexuality is so much more than sex. It has to do with sensuality and the feeling of touching, which can be cuddling, intimacy and closeness, which doesn't have to be sexual at all. It has to do with how you feel about your gender identity, about who you're attracted to and what ways you're attracted to them. It's about your sexual and reproductive health and getting that information about how your body works. And then again, like what sex you want to do, what sex you don't want to do, what different activities within sex, and your history within that. So if you Google circles of sexuality, there's guides on how you can talk to teens about this. But all of that is really helping them to build agency, that they control this. You get to control all of this about you. You have the power to control, to decide, what is the gender identity that I have? What pronouns do I want to use for myself? Of course, we have to think about safety, and they need to think about safety for themselves within all of these things. So encourage folks to go at their pace. There's a lot of pressure for folks to get into relationships, to be sexual. Although what we are seeing is that with teens these days, there is a decline in sexual initiation. But intimacy can be built without sexuality. People are FaceTiming a lot more often, especially during the pandemic. Teens even before that, though, were. So building intimacy in other ways and being patient with yourself. Remind them that they have power. Remember the word, we use the word empowering a lot, but remind them that they do have power. They get to decide who they date, like what you have with that person. If you want to be physical, when you want to be physical, it doesn't need to be pushed. especially with the wrong person. So in all of that I have done when I do this type of work, I always want to balance talking about the gunk of violence and red flags with the healthiness. And that's what I tried to do in this presentation too. And that's what I encourage you to try and do as well. There's a lot of stuff to talk about the gunk and to see examples of gunk, but we really do have to uplift what good healthiness is if we want to show people that it's possible. So there are certain red flags. We do need to talk to people about red flags because, as I said before, experiencing sexual violence is the biggest predictor for experiencing it again. So we need to help people to identify what grooming behaviors can look like. So if somebody is so nice to you and spends so much like time and attention on you, that could be healthy and great, right? It can be like, oh, we're in the honeymoon phase. And once grooming can then turn into something that can be harmful, where they start pushing your boundaries, where you say, hey, I'm not really interested in that. Come on, please. Don't you like me? Don't you care about me? Don't you care about what my needs are? What about my boundaries when someone tries to pressure somebody into them? So really talk about pushing boundaries little by little, the different tactics they might use towards pushing boundaries. Even if they seem small and minute, they start small and then they get bigger. And pressuring comes into play. Pressuring someone to do something that they want to do. And again, can start small and getting bigger. Isolating someone from their friends, from their family, from the activities that they like, so that the person who's causing harm is, centering them so that they become completely reliant on them. And I think one of the important things in terms of boundaries to look at for this is phones. Are they saying, don't be friends with that person, don't talk to that person, block that person, don't message that person, I want to see your phone and who you're talking to. Sharing your passwords is a very controversial thing. Talk about sharing your passwords as a boundary. Putting you down, calling you bad names, controlling you in some way, shape, or form. Those are all red flags. So letting survivors know what healthy is, but also what unhealthy is. And that even if someone is healthy in some respects, they can be unhealthy and harmful in other respects. And I think part of this is holding multiple truths. We oftentimes want to see people who cause harm as all bad. We want to see the world in black and white because it makes the world easier for us. But teens or anyone who cause harm, they're not born bad seeds. Their first time committing like an act of violence isn't the first time they've seen violence. It's because there's other influences in their life. So we need to remind survivors and ourselves oftentimes that like the person that they're dating who hurt them or is hurting them or might hurt them is capable of both harming them and having healthy elements to a relationship. Oh, breakups. I created an entire 60-minute class on breakups and rejection and how to deal with them. And it was something that was asked for by my students. How do I handle a breakup? How do I initiate a breakup? And there's a lot of violence. I remember I was in class and it was the breakup class. And I'm talking about like, people will influence you and say, you can't do this or I'll hurt myself. And one of my students just started crying. And she disclosed to me that her boyfriend was texting her that day saying that he was going to kill himself if she breaks up with him. So know that these types of elements can be present, right? And so breakups can be a time where there's violence and they can be a time where it can go okay too. So let them know if they're going through a breakup to reach out for support. Even if it's not an unhealthy relationship, oftentimes when people partner up, they tend to decrease seeing other people in their lives, their friends, their family. They spend less time with them because they're spending more time with their partner. So reaching out for support and letting other people know, hey, I'm going to need some extra support right now. Can we please hang out more often? And then plan for extra activities and connections during that time. Plan boundaries for your ex, for yourself and for them. Are you going to continue following them on social media? Is it okay for them to text you? Whatever, whether you're the person who wants to break up or the person who's getting broken up with, this is important for both sides. Giving yourself time, and there's no equation. Like I was reading once, like, oh, give yourself a week for every month you are with each other. And I don't think that necessarily holds true. Everybody's unique in their relationship and what they need in terms of time and space for healing and grieving. And then, of course, safety planning, especially if this is a relationship where there was violence. Safety planning is going to be necessary to help that person to get out of it. Safety planning sometimes is also just important if it's an unhealthy relationship that isn't really helping them to grow and be where they want to be. Sometimes it's just like, okay, let's safety plan so that you don't text them when you're feeling sad. One thing for us always to remember is that healing from anything isn't linear. It's not like, I just want to get to the point where I'm fine and can date anyone and do anything that I want and not feel unsafe. Even if you haven't experienced sexual violence or intimate partner violence, that's not always going to be true for you. And you can feel like for a year, you've been doing really well and you can hook up with people, you can be in relationships with people and it's comfortable. And then maybe something else happens in your life. Maybe you lose a pet or a family member gets sick or you have some sort of stress and you start feeling unsafe again. That's normal, totally normal. And it's important for us to normalize and remind folks of this. Why aren't I over it? Well, because this is a journey in life and it's healing and there's no end to it. But the good news is it's a journey, and the journey is about learning about yourself and growing and loving yourself. In this journey of exploring your boundaries and learning what you like and learning what you don't like, it's about learning to love yourself and get to know yourself, which I think is something that's super cool. And there's so many resources out there, like Instagram accounts, where it's like self-love and promoting that. And you can really infuse talking to survivors about this journey and about learning how to get back into their body and learn to trust again as a journey of self-love and learning about themselves. Okay, so I am just gonna again say that this teen toolkit that we have is amazing. It's so comprehensive. There's so much resources in it. So check it out. Email Maria. Should they email you for this? Agata, who should they email about this?
Start with the info box. I'll put that in the chat box and we'll get it to wherever it needs to go.
Gotcha. Thank you. So here are some resources that I want to share with you. I've been raving about Scarletine as well as Love is Respect. Planned Parenthood had some great resources for teens as well. Sex Etc., Advocates for Youth. Those are all some great websites. Coach's Corner, which is Coaching Boys into Men, which is a sexual violence prevention programming. Teen Domestic Violence Month. That's Not Cool, which is a cool website about digital safety for teens. Join One Love and the Trailhead Institute. So you're going to be getting this slide, so you'll be able to find these links there. All right, we've got 7 minutes for questions. So does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, anything? All right, what do you say to the student who said their boyfriend would kill himself if they broke up? Great question. So what I said to her was, that sounds really scary. How does that make you feel? I said, that concerns me. And I said, like I was talking about in class, like, even if that's not what he means to do, what that's doing is he's manipulating you. He's trying to get you to do something that is not right for you by saying that he's going to hurt himself. So can you be concerned for him? Yes, you absolutely can. You can, instead of doing what he wants by getting back together with him, if that's not right for you, which it sounds like it's not, especially because he is doing something, even if it's not intentional, it is harmful and something that we could consider abuse. Get him help. Reach out to someone. Say, like, I'm really worried about you. I care about you. And it's important to me that you don't hurt yourself. Are you talking to someone about it? Can I tell someone about it? Like, making sure. So if her primary was concerned with that he was going to hurt himself. So I did talk to her about that, but I said, and this is not okay. Any other questions? How do we get past the stigma of discussing porn consumption with youth imposed by parents and teachers? Great question. I dealt with this a lot, especially because I'm not shy. I'm not uncomfortable. I will talk all about this stuff. And sometimes you need to meet your community where they're at, and they're just not going to let you in and talk about it. And if they're not going to, then there's other things that you can talk about. But there are conservative religious organizations that talk about the harms of porn. I do think that they're very anti-porn, but they're talking about it. Even like in the conservative school district that I was working in Portland, or in the suburbs of Portland, the parents were like, please help talk about porn. And so they even wanted it. So I would say, like, talk to them about what research shows, bring research. And there's a plethora of it out there. There was a webinar, I think that's even on our website. No, it was someone else's webinar that I was watching recently, but look for the research. It's absolutely out there. Bring that to show people that they need to start talking about porn. And it's a pretty logical thing. People do understand that people are being exposed to porn. And some people, like, I've had this literally said to me that, like, you're ruining the purity of my child by talking about porn. And there are some kids who aren't watching porn, and yet they still might be hooking up with the kids who are watching porn. And so they still can experience that harm. All right, we got 3 more minutes. Maybe, does anyone have like maybe one more question? All right, well, thank you. This is my baby Kaya. You might have heard her yowling to go outside. If you have any questions, please feel free. You can always email me. Love to chat about all this stuff. So yeah, I hope that you were able to get something out of this, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for this amazing information and very timely for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So we very much appreciate it. Thank you all for being here for this webinar. Any questions that might come up, do feel free to reach out to Jenna in the follow-up email that I'm going to be sending. I will be including her email address. You can email her directly. You can also email me, and I can get that question to her as well. And again, any other questions that pop up, feel free to do that. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be sending that follow-up email here shortly with copies of the slides. And then that information, it's also going to have a link to the survey that I mentioned earlier. Those are really helpful for us and so important. So please do fill that out. We do have an upcoming webinar March 31st that's also youth focused. It's called Your X, the Young Advocates Institute, and we have someone from the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Tracy Wright, who will be talking about kind of pivoting to a virtual format in some of these conversations that you all are going to be having. So that's March 31st at 10:30. Keep an eye out for that. And thanks again for joining us today. Thank you again, Jenna. We're so excited that you were able to be here. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
And I'm going to play us out playing the song Lose You to Love Me, where Selena Gomez, she sings about how, like, to be able to love herself and be who she needed, she had to get out of this relationship. So I'm just going to play the song as we go out.